Representative Reed of the Rules Committee re-reports the following 5 bills, which the clerk will read.
House Bill 18, House Bill 359, House Bill 1153, House Bill 1361, and House Bill 1363, all re-reported as committed.
And extracts from the Journal of the Senate, which the clerk will read.
The Clerk of the Senate, being introduced, presented the following extract from the Journal of the Senate, which was read as follows. In the Senate, June 19, 2017, resolved the House of Representatives concurring, pursuant to Article 2, Section 14 of the Pennsylvania Constitution, that when the Senate recesses this week, it reconvene on Monday, June 26, 2017, unless sooner recalled by the President pro tempore, and be it further resolved, pursuant to Article 2, Section 14 of the Pennsylvania Constitution, that when the House of Representatives recesses this week, it reconvene on Monday, June 26, 2017, unless sooner recalled by the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Ordered that the clerk present the same to the House of Representatives for its concurrence.
Right. Those in favor of the resolution will say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Representative Patty Kim is on the House floor and should be placed back on the master roll. Chairman Metcalf of the State Government Committee reports the following bill, which the clerk will read.
House Bill 1479, reported as amended.
Will the House agree to the bill? It's agreed to. Members, we're going to turn to second consideration. The leader calls up Senate Bill 365. Printer number 357 on page 4 of today's House calendar. The clerk will read a summary of that bill, please.
This bill increases the threshold to sell personal property in second-class township to $2,000.
And will the House agree to the bill? It's agreed to. Members, please turn to page 2. Representative Tom Mert calls up House Bill 1233, printer number 1838. The clerk will read a summary of this bill for us, please.
This bill establishes a better standard for outpatient commitment for persons with serious mental illness.
And will the House agree to the bill? There are 3 amendments. Representative Mert has the first amendment. It is Amendment 1992. And please read a summary of that amendment for us.
This clarifies intent that only involuntary inpatient commitments are considered as part of the criteria for determining applicability of AOT and provides an additional protection for seriously mentally ill individuals under AOT.
And Representative Mert, will you rise to speak on the amendment, sir? You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, briefly, this amendment clarifies intent that only involuntary inpatient commitments are considered as part of the criteria for determining the applicability of assisted outpatient treatment. As drafted, one of the criteria could be construed as including both voluntary and involuntary inpatient hospitalizations. Mr. Speaker, the amendment is also intended to provide an additional protection for seriously mentally ill individuals under assisted outpatient treatment. House Bill 1233 includes provisions enabling treatment providers to inform the court when a seriously mentally ill individual fails to adhere to the court-ordered treatment plan. This amendment provides a corresponding right to the seriously mentally ill individual to petition the court when the consumer in question can demonstrate that the provisions of his or her agreed-to plan are not being followed. For example, if a specific service included in the approved treatment plan is not provided. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. Representative Joanna McClinton is on the House floor and should be placed back on the master roll. I don't see anybody else on the amendment. All those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Members will proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? We're about to record the vote. Have all the members voted? Thank you. The clerk will record the vote. The yeas are 196, the nays are 0. That is on final passage, or excuse me, that is not final passage. That's Amendment 1992 is passed unanimously. There were two other amendments. Representative Margot Davidson offers Amendment 2134. Amendment 2134. The clerk will read a summary of that amendment for us.
This requires a person to participate in assertive community treatment prior to being found to be in need of assisted outpatient treatment.
Representative Davidson on the amendment 2134.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In talking to my colleagues, and I want to applaud the maker of the bill, the underlying bill, House Bill 1233. It's rare that we actually have an opportunity to look at the Mental Health Act and to take into consideration the millions of people that are suffering with mental illness. And I like to call it brain disease for a neurologist who talks on Capitol Hill about mental illness often. If you look at mental illness and any other brain trauma, any trauma to the brain, whether it's neurological, whether it's chemical, or whether it's injury from trauma, like an accident, you see the same types of behaviors in play whenever the brain has been damaged in any way. And unfortunately, under the banner of mental health, there is not a treatment, long-term treatment modality that is in existence in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where people with serious mental illness, like bipolar disease and schizophrenia, can receive long-term treatment. Mr. Speaker, for the last 4 years, I've been working on a treatment modality under the name assertive community treatment, which is the grand standard of mental health treatment in this country and in this Commonwealth. And the maker of the bill agrees with me. And so I have agreed to work with the maker of the amendment, as well as the chairman of the Human Services Committee, to make sure that we provide an opportunity for people with mental health issues to get long-term comprehensive treatment that will help them to lead a productive life as citizens of this Commonwealth, and to finally provide relief to the family members that love these individuals and want to see them be productive members of our community. And so, Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak on my amendment. I'm going to withdraw them at this time, and I look forward to the opportunity to provide long-term community treatment in a voluntary way for members of our mental health community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Davidson, I apologize. Are you withdrawing 2134 and 2135? Representative Davidson is withdrawing both amendments to House Bill 1233. I do not see any other amendments. So with that, will the House agree to the bill? Representative Mert, you have no other amendments, right? So all amendments are withdrawn. Will the House agree to the bill? It's agreed to. The bill is amended, will be reprinted. Okay, now we're going to go to Representative Menser. Steve Menser. Oh, I'm sorry, that's over for the day. Chairman Marsico calls up House Bill 1523. Page 3 of today's House calendar, that's printer number 1987. It's my understanding, I believe there are 4 amendments on that. Representative Dan Miller, first of all, can we have a summary of the bill, 1523, a summary of 1523?
This bill amends Title 44 relating to DNA detection of sexual offenders and other offenders.
And the amendment in front of us will be 2047 from Representative Miller. Please read a summary of that amendment for us.
This strikes the language in the bill requiring DNA to be collected as a condition of ARD for the expanded misdemeanor offenses.
And on the amendment, Representative Miller? Amendment 2047, is that it? Do I have the right? What's? They went, yeah. Representative Miller, it was originally, I believe, under Representative Marsico's name.
Thank you.
It's under Representative Miller's name at this time. Amendment 2047.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the majority's leadership staff for helping to, I think, craft an amendment here that would be very good for the bill. In essence, what it does is it gets to the heart of where some of our concerns were regarding the collection of DNA for some individuals who otherwise would not be convicted of a crime. So I believe this could be an agreed to an amendment, but I definitely thank the leadership team in helping us negotiate something that can work for both parties.
Thank you. And Chairman Marsico on the amendment, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the gentleman for this cooperation, staff, and this is agreed to an amendment. Ask for an affirmative vote.
All those in favor of the amendment will be voting aye. Those opposed, nay. Members, please proceed to vote. And have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? We are about to close the vote. Have all the members voted? And the clerk will record the vote. The yeas are 196, the nays are 0. The amendment is unanimously passed. Representative Miller, I believe, is going to withdraw a second amendment. Representative Miller, I believe, withdraws his other amendment. Yes, please, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I appreciate, again, the work on the previous amendment. If you could withdraw this current one, I'd appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Now, Representative Madeline Dean has 2 amendments. We're going to begin with Amendment 1900. The clerk will provide us a summary for that amendment, please.
This amendment simply makes a grammatical change to the language in the bill. It has no substantive impact.
And Representative Dean on Amendment 1900, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a common sense amendment that I hope my colleagues will vote yes on. It just says that if a defendant person is found innocent and is entitled to the expungement of the DNA taken, that the court shall order that expungement. Simple common sense.
Representative Marsico, or Chairman Marsico on the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, this amendment is unnecessary, and with that, I do oppose the amendment, so I ask for a negative vote. Thank you.
All those in favor of the amendment will be voting aye. Those opposed, nay. Members, please proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? Members, we're about to record the vote. Have all the members voted? And the clerk will record the vote. The nays are 116, the yeas are 80. The amendment does not pass. Representative Quinn offers Amendment 1901. Amendment 1901. And Representative Dean, please can I have a summary of the amendment first?
This will require the court of common pleas where a conviction or delinquency education was secured to notify a defendant of the availability of expungement of the DNA records if the conviction is reversed or the person is granted an unconditional pardon.
Now, Representative Dean, Amendment 1901.
Thank you. I'll be brief, and to echo what the clerk has just read to you, this is simply a notice provision only. The now innocent defendant would simply get notice from the Court of Common Pleas that the DNA is there and eligible for expungement. Thank you. I hope we can get a yes vote.
Yes, Representative John Marr has requested to be placed on leave without objection. That will be granted. Chairman Marsico on the amendment, please.
Mr. Speaker, this is not feasible, and it's not necessary for the court to do this. So I ask for a negative vote on this amendment.
All those in favor of the amendment would be voting aye. Those opposed, nay. Members, please proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? Members, please proceed to vote. And the clerk will record the vote. The nays are 116, the yeas are 79. The amendment does not pass. Members, I do not see any other amendments on House Bill 1523. Will the House agree to the bill? It's agreed to. The bill as amended will be reprinted. Representative Hal English calls up House Bill 359, printer number 377, page 1 of today's supplemental B House calendar. The clerk will read a summary of that bill, please.
This bill expands the mistaken kill provisions of the Game and Wildlife Code to elk and bear.
And there are no amendments. Will the House agree to the bill? It is agreed to. Representative Harper calls up House Bill 1361, printer number 1690, page 2 of today's supplemental B House calendar. The clerk will read a summary of that bill, please.
This bill adds 2 certified Pennsylvania evaluators to the State Board of Real Estate Appraisers.
And will the House agree to the bill? It is agreed to. And Representative Lee James calls up House Bill 1363, printer number 1692, page 2 of today's supplemental B House calendar. The clerk will read a summary of that bill for us, please.
This bill updates the residency requirements to run for office to account for military service.
Will the House agree to the bill? It is agreed to. And Representative Boback calls up House Bill 1153, printer number 1376. That's page 1 of today's supplemental B House calendar. The clerk will read a summary of that bill for us.
This bill provides for licensing reciprocity between states for hunting and fishing licensees for active military personnel.
Will, I believe there's an amendment. Representative Ellis have filed Amendment 1190. Excuse me, everybody. Amendment 1996, and the clerk will read a summary of Amendment 1996.
This provides for reciprocity between states on recognition of hunting and fishing licensees for disabled veterans.
And will the House agree to the amendment? On the amendment, we recognize Representative Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend the author of the underlying bill for what we're doing for our soldiers and servicemen and women. And this just simply adds the disabled veterans as well. And I think that this is a great idea. A lot of other states have already gone this direction, and I think it's time Pennsylvania move in the direction to help the folks that served us so well.
Thank you, sir. All those in favor of the Representative Boback on the amendment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This will include even more veterans, particularly those who are disabled, and it is an agreed-to amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Boback. Representative Brian Barbin on the amendment, please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. This is an agreed-to amendment. It's also not opposed by either the Game Commission or the Fish Commission. I urge a yes vote.
All those in favor will be voting aye. Those opposed, nay. Members will proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? And the clerk will record the vote. The yeas are 195, the nays are 0. The amendment is unanimously adopted. Will the House agree to the bill? It is agreed to. The bill as amended will be reprinted. Members, the chair is calling up House Bill 442, page 4 of today's House calendar. It's printer number 1929. The clerk will read a summary of that bill for us, please.
This bill establishes the State Board of Plumbing Contractors and providing for its powers and duties.
Now, members, the chair is rescinding the third consideration. that had been received. There is a technical amendment that has been filed. It does not need a motion to suspend. That is a ruling of the chair. I am going to just have the clerk read a quick summary of that amendment for us, please.
This amends Section 502 and 703 to make it easier for license applicants with a drug felony conviction to qualify for a license.
And at this time, Representative before I do see that Representative Kinsey, Representative Tallman, and Representative Dush are all rising, but at this time, we are on the amendment. So I'm going to give Representative Christiana, whose amendment it is, the opportunity to speak on the amendment. It does not need a motion to suspend. Representative Christiana, do you wish to speak on the amendment? Then I see that I have Representative Kinsey, then it will be Representative Tallman, then it'll be Representative Dush. Come up to the podium and you may. Representative Dush, you're making a parliamentary inquiry.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Specifically, this bill was on third consideration. I'm not familiar with the method that you used to suspend that. And
well, no, it's not. I'm not using any method. We're rescinding the third consideration, which is appropriate, to entertain amendment on third. Typically on amendments on third, I mean, it is the standard rule. You have to have a motion to suspend. It requires a 2/3 vote. But if the rules state that if it is a technical amendment, if it's not changing the substance of the bill, and it's correcting some aspect of the bill in its language, but is not substantively changing it, then we do not need a motion to suspend for the 2/3 vote. It was the opinion of the parliamentarian as he reviews the bills that come up in front of us. It's not typically that we have an amendment on third. That's not standard fare. But in reviewing it, believed that it was not, that it was technical in nature, was not substantive, and actually spoke to counsel for both the majority and the minority sides. That's where we are.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought you were reverting us somehow back to second.
No.
Thank you.
Representative Tallman, parliamentary inquiry.
Speaker.
Yes, sir.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Yes.
Who determines whether this amendment is substantive or not? I think it is.
The chair. I make the decision in consultation with the parliamentarian.
Well, it does make some substantial changes.
It clarifies language in the bill.
Thank you.
No, Representative Kinsey, you wanted to, after the amendment. Okay, so at this time, we're going to vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment will be voting aye. Those opposed, nay. And those who are opposed will vote nay. Members will proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? And the clerk will record the vote. The yeas are 157, the nays are 38. The amendment passes. We're able to. Given that it was the ruling that it was a technical amendment under the rules, we are able to go straight to the bill. House Bill 442 is in front of us. And Representative Kinsey, I know you have a motion on the bill. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to put forth a motion to postpone the vote on this legislation until Monday, which is Monday's date, June 26th. And Mr. Speaker, the reason for this is that as I read through this proposed legislation, this will have sweeping changes as it relates to plumbers, laborers, and folks in the workforce. And I'm just asking that we give those industries a little bit more time to have a discussion to possibly modify this legislation. So I'm asking Mr. Speaker for a postponement until Monday, just a few days, to allow those parties to come together to have a discussion.
And Representative Christiana on the motion. It is a motion to postpone House Bill 442 until June 26. Representative Christiana on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the motion. This bill has received a hearing through the Professional Licensure Committee last session. It received a overwhelmingly supportive bipartisan vote in the Professional Licensure Committee. We've had an opportunity to caucus this bill, and I would say that regardless of where you stand on the bill itself, this bill has been vetted. I don't see why a delay until next week has provides any benefit to this legislation. There's been ample amounts of time. I've introduced this bill for the last 3 sessions now, and I think it has been properly vetted, and I cannot support a motion to postpone. So I ask the members, regardless of where you stand on the merit, to vote against the motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And Representative Kinsey for a second time on the motion to postpone.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the good gentleman sharing the fact that he's offered this piece of legislation for the past 3 years. However, Mr. Speaker, you know, as we know, every single session every 2 years we get new members in here. And even though he said it's been vetted internally, there's still some conversation externally with the folks that this will impact. And I'm talking about whether it's the plumbers or whether it's the laborers. And so I just think that if we give those parties a little bit of more time to have a conversation, we could probably come up with a better bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. All those in favor of the motion to postpone will be voting aye. Any opposed will be voting nay. Members will proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? And the clerk's going to record the vote. The nays are 120 on the motion to postpone. The yeas are 75. The motion does not pass. At this time, we will call up House Bill 442. I know, can you read the summary of the bill again, please?
This bill establishes the State Board of Plumbing Contractors and providing for its powers and duties.
So the clerk has read the title and a brief description of the bill. The bill has been considered on 3 different days and agreed to. The question is, shall the bill pass finally? I know Representative Dush wishes to speak. Does anybody else wish to be placed? Representative Rapp wishes to speak. Representative Thomas wishes to speak. So we're going to begin with Representative Dush, followed by Representative Rapp, followed by Representative Thomas. Representative Dush, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Oldsmobile 442 was a muscle car that muscled its bulky frame down the road in an impressionable fashion. House Bill 442 muscles good contractors, good plumbers with decades of experience into going one of 2 things, neither of which he wants nor should be compelled to do. We are forcing these good contractors to make a decision. Decision 1, fall in line and register and fall under the control of the government, or to have to endorse somebody, forcing them to defend their business for an imputed lack of qualifications as a result of this legislation.
Karen.
No matter how you try to spin this, it is a government use of force against people who are lawfully and in good faith providing excellent service to their clients. We have good contractors out there who do not want to have to make this choice. They've been working in our homes for decades. They've been working for the people who own properties, rental properties. Some of the members in this House own rental properties. Others own rental properties. And you know what this bill does? It does a second thing. It opens a door for them to be called slumlords. Because what's going to happen is the same thing that happened down in Philadelphia with the Democratic Convention when the convention center decided not to use people within a certain classification. This is arbitrary. What will happen is you've got good people who own rental properties, and somebody wants to come along and say, hey, you're not even using a master plumber. You're not even using so much as a journeyman or an apprentice. You don't have a licensed contractor working for you. You don't have a licensed plumber. Meanwhile, that's somebody that had 40 years of experience who's been working on your rental properties for 20 years and has done an excellent job, now has you on the defensive. Mr. Speaker, this is an abuse of the force of government. You know, we're ignoring the warnings that were given to us by Frederic Bastiat back in the 1730s when he reminded us that all government is force. You're forcing good people to have to defend themselves even though they've never had anything bad in their behavior. You're forcing them to be on the defensive. That is out and out wrong on its face. We do have good people who are apprentice, journeymen, and master plumbers with the unions. I've got friends that are in that. I've got friends who are plumbers. They both have their jobs and they both do very well. We don't have to have these new regulations and then put good people on the defensive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Kathy Rapp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, have order.
Members, please. I would ask that everybody take their seats. We have this bill and another bill still to consider. And I'd ask all members to please take your seats. Everybody's entitled to be heard. Members and staff, if you have conversations, I would appreciate it if you take it off the House floor. I have Representative Rapp followed by Representative Thomas. Members, please take your seats. Staff members, please, if you have conversations, if you could take it off the House floor. Sir, Representative Rapp is about to speak. I need to clear the aisle. Thank you. Representative Rapp, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this bill. I believe this bill is taking us in the wrong directions in the trades in the state of Pennsylvania. I have served on the Education Committee for 11 years.
On the Education Committee, we have seen a true pendulum swing from encouraging all students to go into a four-year university to now looking at our communities and where the manufacturing jobs are in the state of Pennsylvania, to consider the trades, to consider career and technical education. This bill, Mr. Speaker, would require plumbers to be licensed, small business plumber businesses in our rural communities to seek licensing from this state. Mr. Speaker, we just, I believe, a month or so ago, passed a bill for career and technical students, exempting them from PSSAs, from Keystones, from statewide testing, so that they could graduate and pass their NOCTI exams, because we know in education that many of those students are not good test takers. But here we are, in this piece of legislation, we're going to force these same students who went into the trades so that they could stay in their rural communities and even in the urban and suburban communities to have a job and support their families. But now we're going to force on our trades more regulation, more continuing education, more money out of their pockets to send to the state to license them and their profession. Every small business owner in this state, Mr. Speaker, to stay in business, they must stay on top of regulations. They must keep informed on the newest in codes, the newest in any technology, to remain in business in a competitive society and competitive communities in our state. Mr. Speaker, previous speakers stated that if we don't license our plumbers, we'll have situations like Flint, Michigan. Mr. Speaker, the incident in Flint, Michigan had nothing to do with plumbers. It had everything to do with people who are corrupted in government in Michigan. Nothing to do with the plumbers. Mr. Speaker, I stand again with my concerns about this licensing. I ask you to consider the bills that we just passed regarding our career and technical students, and please consider not forcing the people in our trades who already, to remain competitive, must stay up on the latest in regulations, in technology, or they will not be in business. Remember, we exempted our career and technical students from these exams so that they could graduate and go into the trades. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a no vote on this piece of legislation.
Thank you, Representative Rapp. Representative Curtis Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm standing over here because I'm standing with my friend, Representative Rapp. And the other, this is bipartisanship. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have an issue that is not Democrat, Republican, or independent. This is a people's issue. This is an opportunity to decide whether we expand the availability of people being able to get a skill and take care of their families, or whether we close the door on thousands of people who are unable to do that. Now, I have to step back, and I have to make sure that the record is clear. Representative Christiana, the author of this bill, he heard my concerns last week and went back and tried to straighten it out. And I want to thank him for that, because he could have just said to heck with it. But he tried to do the right thing. But it's one of those situations where we got there, but we didn't get through. We didn't get through. We need some time. There is some way to work this out for people who believe that the world of plumbers need to be reduced rather than expanded. There's a way to do that. And so my friend who moved to postpone to Monday, there might have been enough time to get it done. But, Mr. Speaker, the reality of it is, even with the technical amendment, it still sets a standard which is different from any other trade standard. It's different. It also, Mr. Speaker, it says to the people who believe in the law of second chances, who believe that good people who make a mistake in violation of the Controlled Substance Act, that they should have a second chance. And under current law, you can't work in hospitals, you can't work in nursing homes, you can't work in hotels. There are a whole number of institutions that we have said that a violation of the Controlled Substance Act constitutes a drug felony, and therefore you're prohibited from working in many of these places. So now we want to add the world of plumbing and the world of skilled trades. But, Mr. Speaker, I thought it was kind of interesting that the bar to admission to apprenticeship, master and journeyman, is the Controlled Substance Law. What happened to the robbers and murderers? What about this sexual assault on children? What about some of these other heinous crimes? It's not included because under current law, you could deal with that. Remember, this is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This is an at-will state. Employers can pull back through background checks almost on anything. We have an Attorney General's office that has a good consumer protection division that is constantly monitoring the work of people out there in the Commonwealth. So, Mr. Speaker, these provisions make life more difficult for people who need a second chance. So as I watch these votes today, I believe that there's second chance believers on both sides of the aisle that believing in giving people a second chance is not a Democrat or a Republican, is not a Montgomery County resident or Elk County resident, that it's about people. And Mr. Speaker, today is the day. Today is the day. Today is the day that we can stand up on behalf of people. Vote no on House Bill 442. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. Representative Germany is back on the House floor and should be placed back on the master roll. All those in favor of, well, I apologize. Okay, Representative Santora. Representative Santora.
Will the maker stand for interrogation?
The good gentleman has indicated he will stand for interrogation.
Mr. Speaker, one of the prior speakers mentioned several things within the bill. One was that there's more regulation. Is that the case?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I disagree with the previous speaker's comment that there's more regulations due to this bill. In fact, I think this will get rid of a tremendous amount of regulation in that every municipality in Pennsylvania can charge a licensed fee and a licensure. They can even administer their own licensing test. We have lots of municipalities that administer their own license test to do work in that municipality. So if this was a one universal statewide test that then allows our plumbers to go into surrounding states, then I can't support the claim that this is more regulation. In fact, I think this will save a tremendous amount of time, money, and a lot less regulations, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, also it was mentioned by a prior speaker that this would actually cost more money out of the pockets of plumbers?
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with that characterization of the bill either, and I'll give you two examples. To do work in Erie County and around the city of Erie, I have plumbers in Beaver County that bid on work that have to spend $6,000 to $7,000 on licensing fees to do work in that area because every one of their plumbers has to take the Erie test for $350. Mr. Speaker, the same problem exists in the southeastern part of the state, where to do work in the 5 surrounding Philadelphia counties, it costs our plumbers $7,000 to meet all the licensing requirements and to take all the tests. Mr. Speaker, the Appropriations Committee said a biennial license to do work in all those areas would be $56, $26 per year. When one municipality can charge $300, yet you can do work in all the state, the entire state, and all the surrounding states for $56, I don't understand how that is more money and more, you can legitimately say this is going to increase costs. I don't agree with that, Mr. Speaker.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of information put out there that there's no public safety benefits to this bill. Do you agree with that? And where is it addressed that there is or is not?
Mr. Speaker, one group, the Association of Builders and Contractors, put out a letter stating that claim, that there was no public safety benefit to this bill. Yet that same group testified last year on this bill and said that not only would this statewide license improve the protection of consumers, but it would also expand the growth potential for skilled trades. That same group now is saying that there's no public safety benefit, but they testified last year that this would protect consumers. So I feel that their most recent claims are not legitimate. A licensure title protection bill is designed explicitly to give consumers some level of expectation with the professional that they're interacting with. So this is a pro-consumer protection bill.
Now, Mr. Speaker, I know that there is some provision in this bill that actually helps our plumbers in Pennsylvania that want to work out of state, but I'm not quite clear on it. Could you explain it a little further?
We're one of 6 states in the country, Mr. Speaker, that does not have a statewide licensure for plumbers. That means that the states that surround Pennsylvania that have a statewide licensure for plumbing, that means they can restrict Pennsylvania plumbers from doing work in their state unless our plumbers go take their test. So Pennsylvania plumbers, like in my area that live on the border of Ohio and West Virginia, they not only have to meet all those municipalities' fees and tests in Pennsylvania, they also have to go take the Ohio test. They have to take the West Virginia test. They have to pay those fees too. This bill would allow for reciprocal agreements just like 44 other states do in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And finally, does this bill control the practice of plumbing?
No, Mr. Speaker. I think one of the previous speakers and some of these interest groups have said that this bill regulates the practice of plumbing. Mr. Speaker, this is a title protection bill only. It has nothing to do with the practice of plumbing. It's what you call yourself. And you can only hold yourself out as a certain type of plumber if you have a license and you meet those requirements. This is not a scope of practice bill. Those groups and members that are saying that are completely being disingenuous about what this bill does and does not do.
Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. If I could add one other thing. That group, the Association of Builders and Contractors, testified last year. This was their testimony on this bill. This bill only controls the title of plumbing. Their testimony said this bill does not control the practice of plumbing. That was the ABC's testimony last session, Mr. Speaker, that this bill does not control the practice of plumbing. It only is a title protection bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm done on interrogation. May I speak on the bill?
Yes, sir. Representative Santora on the bill.
This bill clearly is a good bill for the plumbing industry in Pennsylvania. This bill will allow plumbers. Before I get into that, I sat through a hearing last year before the Professional License Committee, and I saw non-union, merit shop, union contractors all sitting side by side pushing for the same bill. These members were from all over the Commonwealth, not just the Southeast, not just the West, all over the Commonwealth, arguing for this bill. All the stakeholders came to the table multiple times to work out issues within the bill. And now we have an opportunity to vote on this good bill that helps this industry and elevates this industry in Pennsylvania. I fully support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Kruger-Branicki on the bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Based on the debate that's happening on the floor right now, I feel a little bit confused about this bill, what this bill actually does. I'm hearing people talk about unions and regulations, and by my read of this bill, this is just about public safety. Right now, Pennsylvania is one of only 6 states in the country that does not have a statewide license for plumbers. Let me say that again. We are one of only 6 states in the country that does not have a statewide license for plumbers. So if you're a consumer, if you're a constituent, and you invite someone into your home because you've got a leaky toilet or a leaky pipe, there is no way for you to know right now whether that person is qualified or unqualified. Now, I've heard a lot of rhetoric on the House floor today about who wants this bill and who doesn't. 2 weeks ago, I went to sit with the Pennsylvania Association of Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling Contractors. They just bought an old firehouse in my district in Aston, and this is a training program for small open shop contractors. And I looked around the room, and I asked folks how many employees they had. 1, 2, 3 employees, hoping to grow. All open shop plumbing companies. And they told me that passing this bill was their highest priority. Now, I'll admit, I've also got a lot of union plumbers in my district, and they have also told me that this bill is their highest priority. And I don't know about you, but I haven't heard open shop contractors and union contractors come together very often to tell me that they want the same thing, and it's about keeping people safe. So I will be a yes on this bill today, and I ask you to support it as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And we have 2 other speakers, Representative Fred Keller and Representative Frank Ferry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering if the maker of the bill would stand for a brief interrogation.
The good gentleman has indicated he will so stand for an interrogation. I believe. Yes. Representative Christiana.
Mr. Speaker, it's been mentioned that this bill will help with reciprocity in other states. Will this be, have we contacted these other states to make sure that they will accept a license issued by the Commonwealth?
Mr. Speaker, this bill is the first major step and the most important step in establishing reciprocity agreements. I don't know of any reciprocity agreements that are established by picking up the phone ahead of time and working out the differences. What I can reassure the gentleman on is that reciprocity agreements are in place when the standards are similar. I feel very confident that the standards in this bill will be extremely close to those of the surrounding states that also have statewide licensure requirements, so that a reciprocity agreement can be reached afterwards.
The short answer is there's no guarantee that they would accept what we do.
Mr. Speaker, let me say this. I will say that there is a guarantee that reciprocity will not be established without this bill. That is the only guarantee. That is, inaction guarantees that we have no reciprocity agreements moving forward.
Okay. Will the bill exempt work done by licensed plumbers from having to be code inspected? I mean, when there's projects in the Commonwealth, you have to get building permits and so on and so forth, or housing permits. Will this exempt that work, those people that are licensed plumbers, from having to get those inspections?
This bill has no effect on occupancy or building permits, and I actually think it says it explicitly in the bill that this bill shall not control local governments from charging fees for those types of business privilege license, occupancy permits. It says on page 25 that this bill will not change that practice.
Will the bill prohibit plumbing contractors, if they were to get this license, would they still have to register with the Pennsylvania Attorney General as a contractor? If they had this license, would that exempt them from having to do that?
This bill will have no effect on the statutes or the requirements that the gentleman just mentioned. So this will have no effect on those other responsibilities under different acts or titles or regulations.
Somebody that's already in the plumbing business, is there any provision to have them grandfathered into not having to take the test if they're already been in plumbing for X number of years?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the question, because I think it's important to understand the transition of how our current plumbers would go from the status quo into a new system. And to be honest, this grandfather provision within the bill is extremely generous. If you are licensed in any of the 53 third-class cities, like the city of Reading, city of Erie, Lancaster City, York City, the city of Harrisburg, if you're licensed in any of those 53 third-class cities, you're grandfathered in. If you're licensed to do work in Philadelphia County or Allegheny County or Delaware County, Bucks County, Cumberland County, you are licensed, you will fall under the grandfather provision, and you will be grandfathered in.
Okay. Are all those licensing tests, will they all be at least as stringent as the state test, or is there going to be differences between our state-established tests and those different licenses?
I would say, Mr. Speaker, that once this bill is in place, aside from the Philadelphia County and the Allegheny County tests, because they're administered to a different construction code, they have customized construction codes that deal with skyscrapers that we don't have in Beaver County or Washington counties. So they do have a different set of construction codes that were established in 1999. But the rest of the tests, like I mentioned, in Erie or Delaware County, Bucks County, Harrisburg, those tests would no longer be necessary. You would take a statewide test that would allow you to do work in all those municipalities. You wouldn't have to pay their average fee that's between $50 and $200. You'd pay one $56 fee instead of each individual municipality fee. And those tests on a local level would become useless. And to be honest, it's outlawed by the bill.
Let me understand. So Philadelphia's test, because they have different kinds of skyscrapers and so forth that they don't maybe in some of the other cities, their test is currently a little more stringent than maybe Erie counties or Erie's or some other places, correct?
I think that's a fair way to characterize. It is a higher standard.
But if I'm a plumber and I've passed a test that doesn't have as stringent of guidelines now, I'm not going to have to take that other test that's more stringent. I'm simply going to be able to use the certificate from the test I passed.
That is correct. If you've already taken a test and you've already passed the test in Philadelphia County and Allegheny County, and you're licensed to do work currently, you will become a master plumber under this bill by filling out your application, notifying the requirements under the bill that you have fulfilled that requirement, and you will not have to take a test, and you would be grandfathered in under this bill.
Okay. Just another question that I would have would be Section 502 when it goes under qualifications, whether it's a master plumber or a journeyman or apprentice. Each one of those has a section that mentions and pay the fee is set by the board. Are those fees have not been established? They're set by the board?
That is correct, Mr. Speaker. Those fees have not been established, but let me give you a little bit of background on how those fees will be controlled. These fees, the fees that will be established, our Appropriation Committee fiscal note has identified or estimated that the biennial fee would be $56, and they came up with that number because the language controls the amount of the fees that the board can set to merely cover the costs of operating the board and enforcing the act.
Okay. That ends my interrogation. On the bill, please.
On the bill, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to get some answers on this bill because after reading it and going over it several times, I've heard a lot of assertions this afternoon that this is about public safety. Okay? Currently in the Commonwealth, if you're going to build a building or you're going to do renovations work, you get a permit. That permit is governed by the local agency hired by that municipality to make sure the work meets standards. You're still going to have it inspected. Okay? Public safety, the code inspector is still going to come in and inspect that construction work or that plumbing work. So we can say, and we can feel good by saying this helps public safety, but it doesn't do that. It doesn't exempt anybody that's a licensed plumber from the code inspections. It doesn't say that we don't have to register with the Attorney General's office. You still have to do those things. Those things were put in place to make sure that people in the Commonwealth were following those rules for public safety. Now, all of a sudden, we've decided that the Attorney General isn't good enough and that our code inspectors aren't good enough to oversee this work, and we have to create another bureaucracy that somebody's going to pay money to so that they can do work in the Commonwealth, or they can hold themselves out as a plumber. Again, we have fees that are going to be set by the commission. A commission of non-elected people are going to be setting fees enough to cover the expenses. Well, we haven't defined in the bill what expenses they can charge, how elaborate their building or their offices can be, what their expenses should be. It says reasonable expenses, but I'm sure that if we put reasonable expenses for debate up here in this House floor, there's 203 of us, we'd probably have 300 different estimations on what reasonable would be. So we can feel good by saying it's going to get reciprocity, but there's no guarantee. We can say, well, that's the first step in reciprocity. Well, we already have laws for other things like concealed carry permits, and we don't get reciprocity from all states on those.
So I don't know what makes us think that as soon as we license somebody, we're going to get reciprocity. I don't see how this improves public safety when we have code inspectors and we're licensed with the Attorney General. And now we've already found out that if we take a test that's not as strict as what the statewide test may be, we're going to grandfather you. Well, there again, that does not help public safety. The fees that are set, and if you read the bill, they're set by a commission that is not elected by the taxpayers. And they can change those fees as they need to change those fees based upon what they deem their expenses are. Okay? We already have problems with people following these rules and keeping things reasonable. Now we're going to have some unelected bodies setting fees and governing that. We don't trust the Fish Commission to do it. We don't trust the Game Commission to do it. But all of a sudden, we're going to trust another unelected commission in the guise of public safety, which we've already realized does not do anything to help that, to do this. I think we should vote no on this bill. It's not necessary. The people of this Commonwealth do not need us to protect them from the people they hire to do the work in their homes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Keller. And Representative Frank Ferry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've heard both through caucus last week and discussions last week and now on the floor today several criticisms of this piece of legislation, and I think it's pretty important that I impart a few stories on my colleagues about some people that work back in my county and some of their history. The first story I'd like to talk about is a gentleman by the name of Kevin Glasson, and the plumbing company and heating and air conditioning companies that he and his family own employ 24 people. Kevin got his start by going to our technical school in Bucks County. He was originally rejected from the program. He got on his bike, pedaled from his Levittown house, talked to the administrators, and his courage and composure led them to accept him into the program. And now he and his wife run several successful contractor businesses that employ people with good living wages in Bucks County. Kevin is also a member of ABC. This issue is so important to Kevin that Kevin took the time to take a day off from running those companies to come up here and testify at the hearing on this bill. Likewise, a gentleman by the name of Kevin Seifert started his career as a plumber working out of the back of his station wagon. Kevin successfully runs a plumbing business now that employs roughly 35 people and is a very benevolent, just like Kevin Glasson is, they're very benevolent people in our community. Right now, any Tom, Dick, Harry, or Mary can hang out a shingle and say they're a plumber. And we have a responsibility in this body to do what's right for the protection of the residents of our community. This isn't about Flint, Michigan. This is about the senior citizens in our community. A handyman who held himself out to be a plumber in our county went and installed a hot water heater, gas-fired, in a senior citizen's basement. That plumber/handyman did not vent that hot water heater. We are very lucky that that senior citizen did not die of carbon monoxide poisoning because this individual that had whatever degree of skill held himself out to be a plumber, went and worked in somebody's home, and put that person unnecessarily in harm's way. A plumber from our community that is an advocate for this program actually went forward, found the problem, fixed the hot water heater, properly vented it, and ultimately over the course of time saved that property owner's life. We heard the concerns about the impacts on good contractors. Well, what are the impacts that bad contractors are having on the constituents that we meet? That is the impetus for this bill. I have worked with the plumbing community in Bucks County in this Commonwealth on this for the last several years on this issue. These are real stories. These aren't arbitrary stories. This isn't calling somebody down the street. These are real people that run businesses and want to be held to this standard. I request a yes vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, we're nearing when the maker of the bill gets to speak on the bill. And I understand, I saw Representative Dom Costa just asked to be recognized. Sir, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to make this very short. I am a registered master plumber, have been one for
more than time than you want to remember. And I can tell you this, I'll make it real simple. We want this bill. We need this bill. We need to protect people. And there's a slogan that goes on, the plumber protects the health of the nation. And believe me, that's true. So please, vote the affirmative of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Harry Reedshaw on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, listening to all the speeches here, whether you're pro or con on this piece of legislation, I must say that some of the negative explanations have gotten far off track. So let's keep this simple and let's explain what this bill really is. As we all know, there was a hearing, Professional Licensure Committee, it came out, unanimous vote. But my message here is, which everyone should listen to, because here's the fact. This is a title protection bill only. It will not, does not change anyone's scope of practice. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I ask everyone to vote yes.
Thank you, Representative Reedshaw. Representative Curtis Thomas requests to speak a second time on the bill. Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make this real short. Clap on that. We all support both Democrats and Republicans support creating an environment where the maximum safety is provided. We all support that. Nobody disagrees with that. But when you take the opportunity to define the class in who will participate, and you define that class in such a way that some get in, some won't get in. And under no circumstances will people with a second chance will have an opportunity. So that is the problem. It is not what it is that we want and that the author of this bill set out to do, but it's the direction that it has taken that have made it problematic. And so that's why we have to be a no on 442.
And Representative Christiana on final passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just would like to clarify one thing that one of the previous speakers mentioned. They mentioned there's no legislative oversight over the fees that this board can assess for the statewide license. And I just want to point out that on page 8, the board is required to submit annually to the Appropriations Committee of both the Senate and the House, 15 days after the governor has submitted a budget, a copy of their budget request for the upcoming fiscal year that the board previously submitted to the department. This bill has multiple transparency measures and controls on the fees that the board can assess. It's in the bill. So, Mr. Speaker, with understanding that the fees are controlled, not to mention the savings that a statewide license will provide for our local plumbers, the reciprocal agreements that will be put in place as a result of this bill will put our plumbers in a better position than they are in today. I point to the testimony of the Association of Builders and Contractors from last year. ABC testified that this proposal, reciprocity, would provide an enormous economic benefit for Pennsylvania plumbers. This bill is supported by both union and non-union plumbers. It provides a extremely generous transition to a statewide license, and that's why plumbing groups from all over Pennsylvania support this proposal, and I urge the members to support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And Representative Dan Mao rises.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I interrogate the maker of the bill, please, just for a moment?
And Representative Mel, the good gentleman has indicated he will stand for your questions.
Thank you. Plumbing work, let's say in an apartment building or somebody wants to hire him to put on an addition, maybe a bathroom addition, does your bill preclude him from being able to do that work because he's not a registered master plumber? For the Journal.
Absolutely not. This bill would not prevent him from continuing to do work as a plumber so long as he does not hold himself out as a master plumber. And
Okay.
I would bet in that hypothetical scenario that that gentleman is probably doing work in a municipality or a county currently that would allow him to become a master plumber without taking another test and be grandfathered in. So he would probably still have a desire to fall under the grandfather provision, but he doesn't have to, and he does not have to change anything he is doing in the practice of plumbing under this bill.
Myself, as someone who built for 25 years and did a lot of plumbing on my own, would I be able to go in and pick up a master plumber's license because I'm grandfathered in with this?
Mr. Speaker, if I could just look at the bill to see if the gentleman would be under the grandfather provision. Mr. Speaker, could the gentleman repeat his question if you'd want to be a master plumber, a journeyman plumber, or an apprentice plumber? I don't know if you specified.
Okay, you made the inference to people being grandfathered in who were plumbers. In a lot of my townships, you don't have to be, they don't require master plumber's licenses to work. So given the fact that I did plumbing work as part of my building for 25 years, could I now be grandfathered in and just go in and sign whatever needs to be signed and be granted by grandfathering a master plumber's license? Exactly what do you need to be in order to be grandfathered in? Just swear on an affidavit that you know what you're doing about plumbing, or you have to take a test? Or
Mr. Speaker, to be grandfathered under the master plumber, as a master plumber, you have to have 5 years of prior experience immediately preceding the application, providing plumbing services within the Commonwealth. Additionally, 5 consecutive years of, I'm sorry, that's all you would have to do.
So if I swore that I've been doing my own plumbing work for 5 years inside of Pennsylvania, I can become a master plumber by this bill. I'm grandfathered in.
Upon applying within 24 months and you're more than 18 years of age,
I passed that one.
And you paid the required fee, which is estimated at $56, then yes, under 3 Roman numeral I, you would be grandfathered in.
So just so I'm clear, because I did work, doesn't matter whether it's on my properties or on somebody else's, I swear on an affidavit that I've been doing it for more than 5 years, I pay the money and I'm grandfathered in and I become a master plumber by this bill, correct?
The only thing I would add, Mr. Speaker, is 5 years immediately preceding your application.
Sure, I still work on my own buildings, so I'm still doing work as plumbing in the Commonwealth, and now I'm going to be considered a master plumber as soon as I give somebody a check.
Mr. Speaker, you would fall under the grandfather clause in this bill. However, there's nothing saying that you could not continue to do what you're doing already. Just you cannot hold yourself out as a master plumber.
Until I give them that check, and then I can say I'm a master plumber, even though you and I both know that I'm really not. But thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate your time.
All those in favor will be voting aye. Those opposed, nay. Members will proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? The clerk will record the vote. The yeas are 105, the nays are 91. That's on final passage of the bill. The majority required by the Constitution having voted the affirmative. The bill passes finally, and the clerk will present the same to the Senate for concurrence. Members, please turn to supplemental calendar B. It's that time of year. And we are calling up House Bill 18. It's printer number 2014, page 2. I understand there's 120 some amendments filed and that they're all being withdrawn. No, I'm kidding. That's not for the record. I apologize. Not for the record. Strike that, please. But members, at this time, Representative Brian McKenzie calls up House Bill 18, printer number 2014, page 2 of today's supplemental B House calendar. Will the House agree to the bill? It's agreed to. This is on second consideration, but our amendment that we have in front of us is A2126. That's Representative McKenzie's amendment. The clerk will read a summary of that amendment for us, please. Amendment 2126, please.
This clarifies a healthcare provider may not refer a patient to a pharmacy where the provider has an ownership interest, requires L&I to consider the formulary developer's conflict of interest procedures when selecting a formulary, prohibits L&I from selecting a formulary from a developer who has a conflict of interest in the medication selected, prohibits a lawyer from referring a workers' compensation client to a healthcare provider or pharmacy in which the lawyer holds an ownership interest.
On the amendment, Representative McKenzie, on the amendment, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 18 introduces a drug formulary in the workers' comp system here in Pennsylvania, a reform that has proven effective in other states. This amendment, Amendment 2126, clarifies that a healthcare provider may not refer a patient to a pharmacy where the provider has an ownership interest, and it also prohibits a lawyer from referring a workers' comp client to a healthcare provider or pharmacy in which the lawyer holds an ownership interest. Additionally, it incorporates two things which actually came up in committee from a Democrat member around requiring L&I to consider the formulary developer's conflict of interest procedures when selecting a formulary, and also prohibiting L&I from selecting a formulary from a developer who has a conflict of interest in the medication selected. This amendment is very important, Mr. Speaker, because first of all, we want to ensure that a drug formulary is adopted in Pennsylvania, that it had no conflicts of interest involved in its development and implementation here in the state. Also, Mr. Speaker, since this introduction of House Bill 18, and some articles that have been around this topic, we have heard about practices that are going on in our workers' comp system that are very scary, quite honestly, for the care of our injured workers. There are law firms out there in Pennsylvania which advertise for injured workers to come into their law firm. They then direct those injured workers to physicians who redirect those patients and those injured workers to pharmacies that are owned by the same individuals who have the law firm. So law firm participants also own pharmacies here in the state. Seems to me that that is a direct conflict of interest. What makes it even worse is that oftentimes these pharmacies are prescribing medications which are very expensive in nature, which are driving up the costs in these particular cases, and then the law firms on the other side are using those inflated medical costs as leverage in their settlement agreements on the legal side. A very dangerous practice for our injured workers, Mr. Speaker. We need to close that down, close down these loopholes in our law, and make sure there are no conflicts of interest. I would ask for a yes vote on Amendment 2126. Thank you.
Representative Jean DiGirolamo on the amendment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the amendment, I have very serious concerns about how this amendment and how it relates to the bill gets in between injured workers and their health care and their doctors, Mr. Speaker. Also, for the information of the members, today there was a Supreme Court ruling, a 6-1 decision, that the impairment rating evaluation process was declared unconstitutional. House Bill 18, though its designation of a guideline formulary to a private entity, is pursuant to this rule unconstitutional. So, Mr. Speaker, with the question of whether it's constitutional or not, with the question of how this relates to injured workers getting their health care and getting to their doctors, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to be recognized to make a motion.
Sir, you're going to be making a motion. We did pass the pension bill last week. Or so. Yes, you are free to make a motion, sir. Please state your motion for the record.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move that we refer House Bill 18 with all amendments to the Human Services Committee. Thank you.
Members, the motion is to move the bill, to send the bill to Human Services with the amendments. Representative McKenzie on that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask for a no vote on this motion to recommit the House Bill 18 to the Human Services Committee. Appreciate the comments from the chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee. We have held a hearing on this legislation in the Labor and Industry Committee back in February. We had a pretty lengthy discussion specifically on this Supreme Court case that was just referenced, and we also adopted an amendment in committee that actually deals with this and utilizes the language that was recommended to us from the Department of Labor and Industry. So we have addressed it also. The amendment that we were considering would further strengthen the requirements of the Department of Labor and Industry when they're adopting a formulary by requiring them to take into account conflicts of interest. So again, Mr. Speaker, all of this has been considered, it's been debated, it's been discussed for 4 months now. The Supreme Court case does not change it because, again, we had anticipated that in the amendment that was adopted in committee, and that is taken care of in this legislation that is before us now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All those Representative Mullery, I apologize, sir. Representative Mullery on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the gentleman from Bucks County's motion. We are truly fortunate to have the decision circulated by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court today, and it is directly analogous to House Bill number 18. The Mary Ann Protz versus WCAB case outlined for us a line of cases that specifically address the delegative authority of the General Assembly to other governmental bodies and agencies, where our Supreme Court has consistently found that type of delegation to be unconstitutional. Here, with HB 18, we aren't delegating to another branch or another agency or another department. We're delegating to a private entity. That is exactly what happened in the Protz case. And our court, in wonderful fashion, issued a decision 5-1 telling us that that was unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, House Bill 18 would give either the Work Loss Data Institute or the Reed Group de facto unfettered control over what prescription medication, not just opioids, a licensed treating physician in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania could prescribe to an injured Pennsylvania worker. That is unconstitutional, and that's why I think we need to vote yes to re-refer this to Human Services so that we can get this right. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Mullery. Representative Reed, on the motion to commit to Human Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would ask the members to oppose the motion to recommit the bill to Human Services. I would ask the members to oppose the motion. Thank you.
Representative Newman on the motion, and then Representative Barbin on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the maker of the bill's argument that we considered this Supreme Court decision. Supreme Court decision handed down June 20th, 2017, which by my calendar is today, reads pretty clearly that what we're trying to do today, or would be trying to do today, is most likely unconstitutional. We can go through an exercise of 122 amendments, pass a bill over to the Senate, and if they would pass it, then the governor would sign it. The Supreme Court has made it clear that this will be deemed unconstitutional. Article 2, Section 1 does not allow us to delegate any authority or power to an agency that is not a governmental agency.
Sir, I apologize. You may be making an important constitutional argument, but that's not the motion in front of us. You can, at a later point, make that motion, but right now it's a motion to recommit, and I do apologize.
That's no problem. I believe the motion to recommit was on the basis of this Supreme Court case, which the explanation of it is very important as to if you're going to vote to recommit this to HHS or not. This Supreme Court decision that was handed down today we need to delve into it even more, even though I think it's pretty clear there may be differing minds. But as you read through this decision and why this should be recommitted, and we should look at this as it impacts workers and how this bill, House Bill 18, would delegate certain powers to a non-governmental entity, it's imperative we send this back to committee, understand the breadth of this Supreme Court decision, and understand how this bill, as drafted, is clearly unconstitutional based on a 6-1 decision, one dissenting justice, one concurring justice. So it was really 5-1-1. But I believe that it is proper for our body to take our time to look at this decision and how we divide the power up and assign power here in the legislature to make sure that we are not doing something that is eventually going to be deemed unconstitutional. So I would ask that you support this motion, send it back to committee, study this case, make sure that anything that comes out would meet the parameters that the Supreme Court has laid for us. And I think it's clear that as drafted, this bill was clearly unconstitutional. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And Representative Barbin on the motion to recommit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this motion. And I shouldn't have to remind everybody, but there are three branches of government. There is the executive, there is the legislature, and there is our Supreme Court. This isn't a question of Commonwealth Court, which is the intermediate court, saying you can't do this. I've read the decision. It's a broad, you're absolutely not allowed to do this. So if that's the rule, the idea of going forward with amendments today is really a legislative branch saying we're more important than the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said this is an unconstitutional delegation of authority. It can only be done by the legislature, the House, and the Senate. Because it's not an interim decision, it's the decision of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. At a minimum, this bill should go back to the committee, and there should be, if you want to move forward with this, you should at least have some expert opinion that says somehow the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision decided this morning, which says you can't do this, doesn't apply in the situation. I do not accept as a reasonable explanation you deciding 3 months ago to put in an amendment if this bill was decided as unconstitutional by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It wasn't until this morning that the language of the opinion was even known. But the language says you can't do this. If we're going to be, an equal branch of government, we have to accept when the Supreme Court says you got to do it a different way. It at least should go back to the committee. I ask for a vote in favor of recommitting.
Representative Frank Germany, followed by Representative Tim Hennessy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we have heard, very serious questions have been raised about this bill. So I would urge all the members to vote to recommit this bill to the Human Services Committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And Representative Tim Hennessy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the motion to recommit House Bill 18 to the House Human Services Committee. The Prost decision that came out from the Supreme Court this morning makes it very clear that this would be, that House Bill 18, as it's currently written, would be an improper delegation of legislative authority to an unelected commission. It would actually create a formulary at their own discretion rather than have us take a look at a formulary which the legislature could debate, could approve or reject. This would actually create something and then give it the power of law. It's clear under the Prost decision that that would be unconstitutional in the view of our Supreme Court as composed today. So it seems to me, quite frankly, we shouldn't be doing something that would be fruitless. We should recommit this and give it more thought in light of the decision that came out early this morning. Thank you. I ask people to vote to recommit.
All those in favor of recommitting will be voting aye. Those who are opposed will be voting nay. Members will proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? The clerk will record the vote. The motion to recommit to Human Services has 102 yea votes and 94 nay votes. The bill at this time will be at Human Services. And at this time, there are no further votes. The leader moves that the following bills be recommitted to the Committee on Appropriations. These are the bills. House Bills 359, 1153, 1233, 1361, 1363, 1523, and Senate Bill 365. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The leader moves that the following bill be removed from the table calendar and placed on the active calendar. Senate Bill 624. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The leader moves that the following bills be removed from the table calendar and placed on the active calendar. House Bill 1248. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The leader moves that the following bill be removed from the active calendar and placed on the table calendar. House Bill 1248. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Representative Matt Bradford moves that the House be adjourned till Wednesday, June 21st, 2017 at 11 a.m. or unless sooner recalled by the Speaker. How are you?